Okay, our next guest is Matt Hoff with West Coast Kinetic Solutions. He spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, including special operations. Now he's teaching civilians what he knows about how to make them better shooters. So we wanted to have him on the show and welcome him. This segment, of course, sponsored by Cargo. Check out Cargo Cases and Rugged Gear Outfitters in El Cajon. Go to cargostores.com or go see him at 423 Broadway in El Cajon. Check him out. That's Cargo. Matt, how you doing, man?
Good. How yourself? Doing great.
Very, very good. Dakota and I are very excited about talking to you. I've been looking forward to it. I appreciate you taking the time. So let's go over your background. Tell people where you came from. You spent time in the Marine Corps. Talk about your development there.
Yeah. That's a long or extensive background in the Marine Corps. I did 20 years total time in the special operations community. My first 5 years, I was in the Marine Corps Infantry, where I deployed to Iraq 3 times during the height of the conflict or war, whatever we're calling it these days. And then I transferred over to the SOCOM community, the special operations community, where I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and then did some instructor time. I did 2 years in what we call like a training cell, where I taught direct action or raids. So I taught combat marksmanship, breaching, CQB, and things like that. And then ended up having to transfer over to North Carolina, where I'm originally from, and train the same subject at the schoolhouse. So taking guys from, not being inside the community and bringing them into the community, as well as in the training cells, where I focus strictly on the teams, the guys who are getting ready to deploy and stuff like that.
I was going to say, perfect opportunity. I want to talk about some lingo.
Yes.
Maybe you can help me out. So first off, what does special operations actually mean? Like, what does that mean? When someone says they're in special operations, what does that signify or indicate?
So that's very diverse, right? So special operations has a lot of rabbit holes, right? So when you look at the SOCOM community, each branch has its own internal portion to it. For example, the Navy has NSW, Navy Special Warfare, or your Navy SEALs. And there's also a bunch of different other, categories inside NSW. For example, the Army, they have Army Special Forces, right? And there's a bunch of different categories inside that. They got Green Berets, Army Rangers, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the Marine Corps, we have our Special Operation Command, where we call it MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command. And we have what we call the Raiders, right? And so inside that, we have like our different lanes as well. But specifically, when we talk about the Marine Raiders, they're the ones that go out doing all the action to go behind enemy lines, train partner forces, stand up, secret militias and things of that nature, and then do like kind of the direct action, right? So when we finalize or fix or find, the head of the snake, the lead bad guy, at that point in time, we go ahead and prosecute that target. And a lot of times, special operations is very oriented or surrounded around terrorist operations or counterterrorism operations.
Terrorism, that term has even broadened in the last 25 years, to include a lot of things. And by the way, let's go back half a step to special forces. I think people use special forces or overuse special forces. My understanding is the term special forces really is only Army. Like there is no Marine special forces. The Marines have special operations. There's no Navy special forces. The Navy has special operations. Is that correct? Special forces is just Army, correct?
Correct. So that's just kind of more or less like we call it like maybe a badging or a title to it. So when we talk about Army Special Forces, there's multiple categories. You got like Delta Force, and they go by other names and stuff like that now. But when we talk about Army Special Forces specific, Navy SEALs and MARSOC Marine Raiders, we all fall in what's called like a branch of like White SOF is what we call it. And it's kind of like your tier 2 level of special operations. We have to have the ability to conduct joint operations and speak the same lingo and do the same actions together to conduct operations.
And SOCOM, talk about SOCOM. What SOCOM, my understanding of SOCOM, correct me if I'm wrong, yep, is that some of these units like Delta Force and Dev Group or SEAL Team 6, they don't they report up through a different channel, and that channel goes up into SOCOM, whereas the rest of the military goes up through like the Secretary of Defense, and it's kind of it's a different chain of command and a different source of funding and a very different mission. Is everything I said accurate, or is there anything you want to correct or add?
You nailed it on the head. That's very accurate.
So talk about SOCOM. What is SOCOM's mission?
So SOCOM's mission. So we have multiple different lanes, I guess you could say, and I don't want to divulge too much, and it kind of gets sensitive, and they say, hey, you're out now, so you're not really held to that same standard and stuff like that. And
yeah,
that's why
give us the information that you'd find on Wikipedia. You know what I mean? We don't need. I don't want to get investigated. Just like whatever the public kind of elevator speech on SOCOM. What do civilians know that SOCOM does as far as their mission?
I think the biggest thing that they need to focus on in regards to their, like, hey, what is SOCOM's mission, is anything that's not in your conventional understanding of, like, hey, we're just going to go to war, right? Your conventional side is just going to go to wars, where special operations community is more focused on any special mission that's not your standard operation. And that can be, counterterrorism operation, counterinsurgency operations, unconventional warfare, direct action. Like, conventional forces do not have the authorities to conduct direct action, i.e. raids on high value targets in sensitive areas and stuff like that. But we mainly focus on counterterrorism operations.
So going back to you and your journey, did you enlisted in the Marine Corps out of high school, or what was talk specifically about what you did for the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so right out of the Marine Corps, right out of high school, I was the type of guy that signed up immediately. I always knew I was the type of guy that was going to join the military. I grew up wanting to be John Rambo, the whole gambit, right? I wanted to jump out of airplanes and go chase after bad guys. I've always wanted to do that. And when I was in high school, 9/11 happened. It made me become even more patriotic, right? I became huge on wanting to serve my nation, right? That was like one of my biggest goals. I was like, hey, I want to be one of those guys that people look up to, knowing that, like, hey, he's going to go protect us, right? And as I went through my military career and growing up, I realized there's only a certain amount of people that have the ability to do that, right? And I felt like I was one of those people. I have the ability to do that, right? And so I wanted to ensure that, like, if I had that ability, I want to take on that responsibility. I wanted to make sure I was able to do so. So I joined the military, and in my military career, I constantly did what I could to progress in my military career to kind of like ensure that I was providing that security blanket, which I thought was my place in society.
Well, so going through high school, what told you that, what was that internal voice? Why did you have that internal voice that said, hey, this is me, I can do that? Like, what was that?
So I think there's a lot of things that go with that. I think it's like a mental portion to it, right? I kind of felt that I had like a warrior inside. There's that warrior spirit that you look for, or you find. And I knew I was an athlete. I could compete, right? I found myself very competitive. I was athletic. And it's not that I thought I was better than anybody, but I could most definitely see moments where I could do something and somebody couldn't, right? And I found that, like, hey, I might not be a professional athlete. My goals aren't to become, a rock star baseball player or something of that nature, but I was still competitive. I wanted to play. I wanted to play with the top boys. And it kind of led down this path of, like, hey, there's people who play sports who are enjoying life. And then there was people who couldn't, participate in extreme, sports or being athletic and stuff like that. So it attracted me, right? And I kind of found this balance, right? At the same time, I was a wrestler, I was aggressive. I did these type of sports, and it kind of built me up and built that, mentality as a teammate, and the kind of the warrior spirit moving forward of, like, hey, I had a position inside society and I wanted to give back, right? And that was the mentality. I wanted to give back. I just couldn't help it, right? It was a part of me.
What was the toughest thing? You were in the Marine Corps for 20 years?
Correct.
What was the toughest thing in those 20 years? What was what was your toughest hour or your toughest 15 minutes, or, you know what I mean? Like, what happened to you during that 20 years where you thought, man, this is the absolute toughest, worst thing I have gone through, and I can't believe I made it through?
Man, that's a tough question, because it had a lot of those breaking points, and that was like part of the growth in my military career that I was talking about, that I constantly kept striving, because I always hit that ceiling. There was always a new place that I'd hit. When I first joined the Marine Corps, my first 5 years, I looked at boot camp. Our basic training was kind of like one of the most challenging things I'd ever experienced, because I had gone from being a high school kid to now working with full-on adult grown men who also were my instructors, who had experienced combat and now were overseeing me and challenging me and constantly pushing me. And then I went into the infantry and I saw combat, and that was like a new ceiling that I had hit, right? And then I decided to go to assessment selection. And I would say assessment selection is, probably one of the top things that I had to do, that really pushed me to my limit psychologically, mentally, and physically. So that combination was maxed out, if you would. But then what was interesting is that it had pushed me to a new limit, and I had found myself what we call an ITC, or individual training course, whereas that's where you get the training and education to become this elite MARSOC Marine Raider. And again, it was another ceiling that it took me to, right? And selection is what got me there, right? I had to work myself up to selection, and the selection got me there as well. And then the combat portion of it, as I grew into these leader positions, these leadership roles, were all new challenges the entire way throughout my military career, because I experienced combat in Iraq as an individual was challenging, as a young man was challenging. And then I did these things as a leader in Afghanistan, where I took, Afghan troops and Marines and soldiers, and I was overseeing these people, and I was leading them through these combat, operations, and the mental aspect and the physical aspect I had to take on to kind of prove myself and ensure that they were success, and making some extreme sacrifices, and, putting myself out there were different. They're all different challenges, and I don't know if I could ever pinpoint one that was, harder than the other, but I would have to say they have their own lanes. I would say combat in Afghanistan as a leadership was more challenging than any combat I had experienced. And then in the training world, I would have to say, assessment selection, or ITC, was probably the most physically and mentally challenging thing, more physically than mentally, but than anything else. So, kind of putting those in two different subjects, if you would, but both were extreme, right? And I would say that, the training helped me get to the portion where it prepared me as a person for that. But, at the same time, giving me that leadership and understanding, but it's not as realistic as it can be in training, and then experiencing it in the real world. And some things that you can't train for, especially in combat, you can't train for everything, right? You do your best. And then when you're put in charge of these people that can't speak the same language as you, and you're trying to convince them to basically go hunt down bad people and train them and give you every tool that you have, to prepare them for combat. And then when they get into it and that friction sets in, the reality sets in, you being there to be able to set the example and push beyond that, so they have something to look at and emulate, and to thrive through that, is a different challenge than being a student and be exposed to the most simulated, combat training, the world has to offer, was another challenge on its own. So I was constantly running into barriers, I would say, throughout my military career.
It's so interesting to me. I ask, special operations. I through the show and other avenues, I've interviewed at least a couple dozen special operations guys, at least, probably more than that. Guys that were SEALs, guys that were Green Berets, guys that were MARSOC, all kinds of different, Rangers, all kinds of different special operations. And I never served in the military, and I think that civilians who've never served in the military, when we ask that question, like what was hardest or what was scariest or what was your most challenging, whatever version of that question, I think we all expect to hear, some kind of, version of, well, getting shot at was probably the worst thing. And I've never heard that answer. All special operations guys talk about how challenging, how physically and mentally challenging the training was, and they talk about, leadership challenges like you did when you're describing, leading the locals in Afghanistan, that kind of thing. And I think that is a testament to just how good and challenging military training is, particularly for special operations guys. I really, truly, I don't think I've ever heard, a real, like a combat story. Like, well, I was most afraid during this point in combat. It seems like by the time, it's always like a training thing or training, exercise or mission or whatever. By the time you guys get into combat, you guys, it sounds like you're so well trained, you're so well prepared, you're surrounded by people that are the absolute best in the world. It's just you guys perform so well under that immense pressure because of the hard training you've had. And it's interesting to me how often that comes up when I talk to special operations guys. I think that's a testament to the people, to yourself and the people that came before you and all the training that's been put there by the military. We see it in movies, but I don't think people fully understand just how important that training is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, our U.S. military, and I like to beat on my chest, the Marines specifically, but I think we do bring the most realistic training that can be provided to our troops, right? I think we do a pretty freaking good job because, I've been behind the curtain to kind of stage those things. And, I try to bring as much realism to it as possible. But I always tell the guys, we can't train for everything. We just have to be prepared to rise to those occasions and just be as prepared as possible. And that's what we do our best.
And
but
now
I was
going to say, now you train civilians. You're a firearms instructor here in San Diego.
Yep.
Talk about how your background helps you teach and deliver curriculum through West Coast Kinetic Solutions.
Right. So going kind of back to my career, right, throughout the military and how I got to this point. So when I was transitioning out, or I saw the end of the tunnel basically coming up, I had to prepare for what I was going to do. And I always had the mindset that I was going into law enforcement or Homeland Security, something of that nature, still serving the country. Because that was my goal. I want to still be giving back to, whatever community I felt like I belonged to. And at the time it was broad. It was I don't know where I'm going to end up across the United States, but I'm going to still be serving wherever I end up, my nation, locals, whatever it may be. But unfortunately, as I noticed that coming to the tail end of my military career, I realized that I was running out of time of being operational or being able to wear some type of uniform or, actually be in those type of positions, I guess you say, operational positions. And so I ended up taking on a contract position, like what we call a skills bridge or a fellowship or internship in my last 6 months of my military career, because I knew that I couldn't do those law enforcement or those, law enforcement positions in, even Homeland Security and stuff like that. So I took on this contract position where I was training Marines on Camp Pendleton, and I was in hopes that I would get a job with this company because they said they were expanding. And it ended up falling out. But what I realized when it came back to me is how much I love teaching people, right? Training people. I was like, oh my God, I still love this, doing this, right? And so I realized that I can't be law enforcement or I can't be on the border where I really want to be conducting operations. But what's the last, stance? Where's the last line, of self-defense or whatever it may be? And I look at the civilian populace. And I think I can relate a lot because, amongst the SOCOM community, it's our job to have the ability to not only train, but also educate, right? Other partner forces and even our own military, right? So with my instructor experience and my experience training, locals in other nations, they can't even speak my, language, or I can't even speak their language barrier being there. I feel like I have a good handle on how to create programs and how to structure training and, connect with people and build them and reach the goals that they desire and need, especially when we start talking about 2A, right? When we think about that aspect of things, one of the reasons I put solutions in my company title or name is because I realized in Southern California, there's many struggles for people to have their rights and find the training and find locations and find instructors and funding, right? Financially, how do they pay for these things, right? That's a part of why I put that in my company name, is I want to focus on ensuring that I find a way to kind of bridge the gap for everyone to get the training that they need and desire, right? If you're finding a training site, because I know California, the EPA is doing everything they can to prevent, gun ranges for even existing, creating extra laws and extra steps, and for someone just to have the right to carry a firearm, right? I want to help solve that problem as well, those challenges, and combat that, and at the same time give them the training they deserve, right? And at a decent cost, because it kind of upsets me on how much things cost so much nowadays, and I feel like that's another struggle, and it upsets me, like if somebody doesn't, they feel like they can't find a path or a way to defend themselves because of a financial reason, right? And that kind of segues into my selling point in regards to the membership that I created, and is to create that sustainability and the ability to financially fund themselves to pay for things. Because you look at like CCW and cost of training nowadays, it's unreal here in San Diego. It's unreal. And I think that's, not appropriate for the average person living their normal lives looking for courses and training and education. And so that's like a big part of that solutions that we talked about, like how, my military career has gone from where it was in the very dynamic world to, training and understanding the average Joe that's on the street that get the minimum training they need.
Awesome. That is very cool. I agree with everything. It is kind of crazy how, growing up, you always heard, the old guys who are probably younger than I am now, but back then they were the old guys say, gee, back in my day, a cup of coffee was whatever. And they were talking about like 20, 25 years prior. Now, back in my day when things were cheaper was like 4 years ago. Things have gotten so expensive. And I agree with you, your ability to defend yourself, whether it's buying the self-defense tool that you need, whether it's getting a carry permit or it's getting the training you need, it's gotten so expensive. And I appreciate how conscious you are of that. I think that's very, very cool. Okay, so if somebody wants to train with you, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and learn from you, where do they go?
I think one of the best places to reach out to us is on social media, right? That kind of seems to be the way ahead for our current society's culture and moving forward. Instagram, our handle is West Coast Kinetic Solutions, West Coast being one word, and then underscore kinetics, and then underscore solutions. And then same thing for Facebook, right? So we go by West Coast Kinetic Solutions on Facebook. Those are probably the two most, founding, spots to find us, because I think everybody uses social media platforms at this point in time. And then you can just Google us as well. Like Google's like a good tool. Everybody, uses that tool every day, I think, on a daily basis on how to search or answer questions. Like, so if you're looking for me, I try to make it as easy as possible. I even put my cell phone on all those locations so you can contact me directly, because I love hearing the stories. I love hearing the struggles. And I tell people when I'm on the phone with them, like, what is your struggle? What is your challenge? Why can't you get to the goal that you want? And I'm going to find it for you. It be a training spot, it being consistent, it being, firearm, you need, answers on what's the best to carry. My background on conducting low vis operations overseas, I have, multiple different experiences in that. I can kind of advise those type of things. I give that solution there, right? I do that for law enforcement and civilians. So, when it comes to these challenges, I offer that to everybody. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, I can't afford, I don't want to put company names that are out there, but like, some of them are $650 for a CCW training course. And I'm like, that's outrageous. That's more than the gun that they purchased. I was like, no, you have the right. We're going to find a way. And one of them offers the membership. I'm like, give me $50 and we'll find a place and we're going to go train. And that's kind of my mentality. And that's how I remember.
So sounds like beginner, intermediate, or advanced. It sounds like pistol, rifle, shotgun. You offer it all. You offer it at an affordable rate, and you're looking forward to working with folks in the Southern California or anywhere, but you're here in the Southern California area. So look you up on social media, reach out to you directly. And again, that is Matt Hoff with West Coast Kinetic Solutions. Matt, thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for your commitment to the Second Amendment. And thanks for your time today. That was super interesting.
Oh, this was great, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I think everything you guys are doing. You guys are doing the bigger footstep here, fighting all lanes of conflicts that we have with the 2A rights. So I can't thank you guys enough.
Well, thank you for the kind words, man. Excellent. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon, Matt. Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. And check out our website at gunownersradio.com.